All right, so the attendee list has stopped going up. So I think that means that most of the people who plan to join are here now. So let me introduce myself and we'll get underway with this presentation. So my name is Clint Osterholtz. I am an enterprise sales engineer at Datadog based here in New York City. And I'm really excited to showcase how Datadog can help your teams and ensure that your applications provide a great user experience. As I mentioned before, if you are just joining us, I'll reiterate that you can send us any questions in the Q&A box, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. So please do so throughout the presentation, and I'll answer as we go along, or I can answer towards the end if it's going to be a more involved question. So as we move along, before we jump in to go into digital experience monitoring, I want to show how Datadog can ensure, before I can show that Datadog can ensure your applications provide a great user experience, I do want to talk about Datadog overall, that the platform can provide to your teams. So I'm going to step through some history about the company and some of our different steps, different products that we offer currently. So Datadog is a unified software as a service monitoring and analytics platform for DevOps and business teams in the cloud age. We help companies understand the true state of their applications and systems infrastructure, make business decisions, troubleshoot customer issues, and improve the end user experience. The company was founded in 2010, and we are headquartered in New York City. From the very beginning, the Datadog platform has consistently broken down silos between teams, the dev teams, ops teams, and business, client side and server side, to give you a holistic view of your environment so that your teams can troubleshoot and fix issues faster with no context switching. Our operating principle, as you'll see written up top there, is simple but not simplistic. So we sought to create a monitoring platform that is easy to use on a self-service basis. Today, we have over 13,000 customers and over 1,400 employees. And that's a lot of growth, and it wasn't a happy accident. It wasn't just a coincidence. This happened due to a shift in the market and several changes in the technology industry over the last decade. The last decade has seen some fundamental changes in enterprise computing. As organizations migrate their infrastructure and applications to the cloud, we have seen an explosion in technology platforms used by teams, from a few standardized suites to many diverse software as a service and open source solutions. An increase in computing units. So there are few centralized servers in a data center, switching over to many distributed cloud instances, containers, and microservices, otherwise known as dynamic and ephemeral technologies that have been a huge disruptor as instances proliferate and churn faster. Releases have become more frequent, shift from a waterfall to agile model of deployments and releases. We also have seen the number of teams and businesses involved have gone from being siloed to being integrated, to where you now see something closer to a biz dev SecOps sort of model, in that the business has always been impacted by development releases, by infrastructure, by security, by business decisions, but they haven't always been treated as such. So with them being in these individual silos, that has never fully meant that they could react to market changes, to outages, to new releases. And now that these teams are working together in cohesive and communicative units that are no longer siloed, they've needed tools that match that. So all of these collectively, these four shifts that have occurred in the market over the past 10 years, this has led to a paradigm shift. So an order of magnitude increase in chaos and complexity. So depending on where your company is right now in your cloud transformation journey, the competencies that are needed for monitoring are very different. This is also true if we consider how modern applications are built. And so this is Datadog's focus. We can help your teams collect all of your data from all of your servers, containers, applications, and cloud-based services with a single unified agent. That same agent collects metrics, logs, and traces. All of that data is sent to Datadog's software as a service platform, which enables us to do all levels of monitoring listed here on the slide. So you'll see infrastructure monitoring for your backend servers and cloud-based instances, APM on the application server side, which gives you insights aggregated across all requests, log management for all of your front-end and back-end logs that allows you to analyze the details of issues, synthetics for proactive testing of API endpoints and websites to detect issues before it even impacts your customers. You also can use real user monitoring for browsers and mobile devices, network performance to manage and optimize the traffic flow across your entire stack, and security monitoring to detect threats in real time with end-to-end visibility. So today we will be focusing more exclusively here on real experience or user experience monitoring. But if you do have any questions, if something is related still along the way, as I mentioned before, please feel free to ask questions in Q&A. And we'll get to those along the way as we cover this. So with everything enabled in one platform, your teams have a single source of truth with zero context switching. Our machine learning and automated correlations help you get insights and take action using all of this data. From tracking SLOs to real-time root cause analysis and integrations with your collaboration and workflow tools, Datadog has you covered. Any stack, any app, any scale, anywhere. So in this webinar, we're going to focus specifically on Datadog real user monitoring and synthetics to see how your teams can leverage Datadog to ensure your customers are receiving a great experience for all your web and mobile applications. So first of all, when it comes to performance, you need to have visibility into the latency and errors of your applications. Latency can ruin the experience of your users with your application, and the longer you make them wait to have the experience promised, the more likely they are to leave it. You want to ensure your teams have a pulse on questions like, what is the latency that end users are experiencing? And if it's not good, where in the application does the bottleneck exist? Is it in the front end, the back end, or a third-party extension? Identifying this is critical. As you may know, things move very quickly online, and seconds can feel like an eternity for your users. So latency is especially important in these instances. And while latency is bad, errors make it so that your users cannot even use your applications. So it's important to identify and fix these issues as quickly as possible. Ideally, your teams have ways to identify errors before they reach production or before they affect users in production. And once an error does occur, it's important to identify what the impact of these errors are for your end users. If you're not able to catch latency changes or errors with the visibility you have into your environment, you can also be notified through support tickets. Support teams are the frontline responders to issues that are identified by customers. And it's important for support engineers to quickly identify if the issue is due to an application problem, or if something is a user error, or if it's on the application side. It's critical to know how large or far-reaching the issue could be. To answer these questions, it's critical for the support teams to get complete context into the user sessions of customers that submitted the ticket. They need to quickly be able to scope down to just this user session and to be able to visualize what pages, actions, and calls to the server that this user session has. Having this visibility also allows you to identify in the journey that the user ran into the error and why. And if this is a larger issue than you originally thought, how you can share the relevant information with an SRE team or a centralized monitoring platform team. While performance and support are focused on ensuring there are no urgent or immediate issues with your application for customers. So I do want to point out that I did get a question in Q&A from Sergey. And I'm going to answer this for you live. So you asked, how can you guarantee that collected sensitive information for monitoring from customers cannot be used against them? That's a great question. And when it comes to Datadog, we don't want to collect that information in the first place. That's why we allow you to scrub information that's sent to us. Any sensitive information, it may depend on what your definition is of that, but we only collect information from the user agent and then any information that you opt to send to us. So we make it very clear and explicit that whatever information is being sent should not be sensitive information in the first place. And in general, that's our approach to data within Datadog overall. Data can be scrubbed at the agent level and can be filtered out there. So we do want to ensure that we do take data integrity and security very seriously. And that's something that we make sure that we filter out very early on and very high up the pipe. So thank you for your question. So user analytics. User analytics will enable your product and marketing organizations to understand how your customer acquisition strategy is working and how your current customers are engaging with your product. Marketing teams are focused on questions like how successful a certain marketing campaign is, or understand how many users actually converted to customers. While PMs are interested, and project managers are interested in learning more about how a new feature is being used by customers, what about the feature they're leveraging heavily? Are there things they should be getting more feedback for? To answer questions like this, it's critical not only to collect product usage data, but also to be able to add custom user attributes like, say, a user ID to identify specific users. So let's talk about how Datadog helps to solve some of these challenges. Datadog was built to do some unique things in this space. First of all, with performance monitoring. This is Datadog's bread and butter. This is what we've been working on since we were founded in 2010. And as you saw, Datadog was founded with the main principle to provide teams a single platform for all of their observability needs. For web and mobile apps, Datadog provides core web vital metrics for every single user session that we collect. These are metrics that have been defined by Google to provide unified guidance for quality signals that are essential to delivering a great user experience on the web. So this allows your team to understand the experience your users are having with your applications from an aggregate as well as a per session basis. And you can see here as one example, this is looking at largest contentful paint. So at the moment where the largest amount of content is loaded to the page, how quickly is that happening so that your users are having a good experience? If there are issues where one of these metrics is not doing well, Datadog also provides visibility across the stack so you can understand exactly where the latency is stemming from. For example, is it the network or infrastructure or the backend code that's a bottleneck? In an instance like with largest contentful paint, just to take that again as an example, it's possible that the load for your contentful paint is not the largest that you were anticipating it to be based on perhaps a database issue where it's trying to retrieve, for example, a list of products or a list of articles that you had intended to put in the body of the HTML. And when that occurs, then there could either be an error where that spins out, or it could simply load, maybe it's loading fast, but it's not loading properly. So those errors will still also highlight that that's specifically a backend problem that's occurring with your database where those API calls are not pulling the data that they're intended to. So for errors specifically, Datadog provides both a proactive measure to ensure you catch these issues before your customers do, or before any feature is released to production through synthetics and error tracking, which intelligently aggregates any front-end errors into aggregated issues. So for support, it's possible to scope down to a specific user section, which allows for, first of all, it is ease of use with our RUM product so that you can identify customers if you're passing in an ID, for example, to identify them. And you can use our facets to search through that data so that you can find specific attributes on aggregate. So for example, if one of your customers is experiencing an error on the site, You can group that customer by other customers by geo, by OS, by browser type to ensure or perhaps investigate if the problem that they're seeing is occurring on a specific URL, is happening with a specific product, is happening from a specific geo. All of those are ways that you can determine whether with the user session context, something is occurring with that customer. So you can identify where in the journey that this problem occurred. Since you have the session timeline, you can actually look at where the customer went through from step by step until they got to their error or were unable to move forward with their journey on your page. And with the granularity, it means that you can look down fully just into that user session, or you can decrease the granularity and look again on aggregate to see if those problems are occurring across other customers or if they're unique to that customer. You can also use full stack visibility. So in this case, where this is connecting front end to back end logs, what this allows you to do is see both what is occurring from the front end side and determine where the error is coming from to begin with. So in some instances, it may be that something within your front end framework was pushed and is now causing an issue. Or it's possible that, as I mentioned before in my previous example, that a database is not producing the data intended, and that would be a backend issue that needs to be corrected. We also do provide an aggregated view for logs from both the browser side and from the server side. So you would be able to look at both side by side with the customer's user journey. And allowing this full stack visibility means that everyone in your organization, from SREs to developers, again, to business people and marketing, can all use a single platform and speak the same language. Datadog is able to support user analytics use cases with our ability to add custom attributes and actions to any user action. So as I was mentioning before, you can look at, say, a unique customer ID that you've assigned to them. You also can track actions that we don't ourselves track. We do track clicks, but there may be some other action the user is taking on the page that you want to monitor. So for example, to identify how successful a marketing campaign is, you could add custom attributes like a marketing campaign ID or a promo code that someone used to checkout to understand every user session where that occurred. Datadog also collects user actions that are taken on your applications. As I mentioned, we collect clicks and we collect taps and swipes with customers on mobile. So that actually gives you a full timeline of user sessions. And one question I do get frequently is our ability to collect those user actions from a single page application. That's something that we've specifically engineered our RUM application, our RUM product for. So that's something that we'll be able to track very easily. So even if your URL does not necessarily update, we can still track those actions on the page and see new loads and anything else that might update data on the page for the customer without any sort of change in the URL itself. So for this talk track, in this instance, for this proof across visibility, I'm just going to read this out loud to you from Tom Heyman. He's the head of platform engineering at Dunelm. He says that Datadog RUM gives our teams visibility into every step of the customer journey on our e-commerce platform, from adding items to the basket to completing the checkout process. RUM also enables us to quickly identify front-end issues, pinpoint impacted customers, and resolve errors so we can deliver a better user experience. So don't just take my word for it. Let's actually look at it ourselves. So let me jump into the platform and give you an idea of what this looks like. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. So this will show you Datadog. So here's the platform. And you'll notice I have two tabs open. And the reason for that is I'd like to actually set you up for a little scenario rather than just showing you everything. Let's actually look at a test site. So this test site is called Shopist. And we're going to go through and buy a couple of things on this site. So I'm a customer, Saturday morning, I just woke up and I'm going to go online shopping. This isn't even really a fake scenario. This is something I probably do every Saturday. I don't spend this much money on chairs, but this is my Saturday. So I may go on here and find something that I really like. So I'll add this to my cart. I also need to get a new duvet cover. So let me add that to my cart. That's actually true. I need to get a new duvet cover. So that reminded me. So now I'm going to go to my cart and check out. So let me go here. And I know I have a coupon code that I can apply for $100 off. I'm lucky there. So I'm going to check out here. And unfortunately, checking out, it says something went wrong. Please try again. Let's be honest, almost anytime you've gotten something like this where it says, please try again, you usually don't. Unless this is something really important that you need to get right away. You probably have gotten this message before and just said, I'm done with this, and you go to a different site. And that's something that you want to prevent your customers from doing. So first of all, this is where synthetics tests come in. So with synthetic testing, what we're able to do is create a browser test to use. A browser test is synthetic traffic that will allow you to go down a specific track. And so in this case, what I'm going to is this one that's called demo production. So this is going through Shopist. And Shopist was the site that we were just on. And by the way, if you want to go to shopist.io and play around, it's a demo site. It's always great for us to get some more traffic. So feel free to go over there if you want to. So you can see here that this is the actions that have been put together for this synthetic traffic. So starting on this page, going to purchase a chair just like this. And then after trying to check out, putting in this coupon code, and everything went through. So that's an ideal track for a customer. Unfortunately, I had a failed result and not a successful one. So if I look at the failed result here, I can see that this states that the error I got was cannot locate element. And it looks like all of the steps are the same except for this final one where the div should say thank you. And instead the div says something went wrong, please try again. It's saying something went wrong, please try again is really bad, which means that in this case, we can see we've got a couple of errors here. It looks like we got a 500 error that was connected to entering winter 100. That definitely is something that we need to look into quickly. In my scenario as a customer, I already went to the site and decided not to check out because I was bothered by that problem. That's why I would have a synthetics test in the first place, to ensure that customers are always able to check out and that the coupon code that we want to enter works properly. So I'd like to show you a little bit more about what that looks like. So I'm going to jump into our editor. And the way that the editor works is a lot easier than I think you may be accustomed to working with when it comes to synthetics. In a lot of instances, if people are familiar, I can't see any of you, but I bet you could raise your hand on this one. If you're familiar with Selenium tests, for example, you're probably used to tests that are very, I do see some people raising their hands now who are familiar with Selenium tests. It can be very painful to work with, and they tend to break pretty often. And we're familiar with that, and we know that that's actually very painful. So we've created these tests so that they're much easier to work with. And what we allow you to do is, you can see we're already right here at Shopist. So I'm just going to start recording, and I'm going to click on the different things that I would like to do for my browser test. So I want to go get the wicker chair. I want to put the wicker chair in the cart. And once I put that in the cart, I want to check out. So I'll do this. This is a little different because this is on a mobile version of the browser, but I can do this. And then I get to the checkout part. So you'll notice that this actually has populated this side with all of the steps for the test. And that's actually really critical in terms of the differences that we offer with our synthetics product versus other synthetics solutions out there. We leverage machine learning to identify these elements on the page. So you'll notice right now for Shop Now, this has looked at the underlying HTML. And what we do is we grab as many parts of that element and stitch them together and create a unique key from that. So that when there are changes made to the page, like maybe you've changed the size of an element or the location of an element, we can still identify it based on that key because we're looking at the underlying HTML instead. That's something that's very critical, because I know that when you're working with Selenium, for example, those tests break constantly. And this prevents those tests from breaking as easily because we're identifying the elements, and this is a much more stable way to do so. Also, if I don't necessarily like what it's used to identify this target element, I can also select other parts of this if I want to do that. And to the question I got before about security, this is a synthetic step So this is all stuff that's coming from our side. And from a security perspective, I'm not passing any information that I don't necessarily need to see. But in case there was something sensitive on the page anyway, I could also just choose to not collect a screenshot for this step, so I'm not getting anything that could potentially be sensitive on the page. So that would be how I would put together my test, though. I've literally just gone to the site and recorded the steps. So even if we didn't have our machine learning that makes these tests durable, this is already a much easier way to set these tests up. So either way, this makes things much simpler to work with. And of course, there are a lot of advanced options that just for the sake of time, I'm not going to get deep into, but I do want to point out some special ones here. So for example, I can grab a variable, and in this case, this variable comes from another test that I'm using, so that if I want to put this in, like for example, where this was putting in a coupon code before, I can put this variable in, and this variable is actually coming from an API test, and that API test is perhaps pulling a token that I need to authenticate a session. So I can actually pull that in initially into my session and populate that somewhere on the page here if I need to do that. For this instance, any of those variables that I pull in, and I just realized I had something that said password, and that's not something I want to put in there. So in this instance, I'll grab one of these. And if I want to interact with the page, I'll just put that here in our discount code. And now you can see that this is part of it. So if I do the checkout process, that's already been populated here as one of the variables I've created. There are a lot of other different steps to authenticate or to validate on the page that you can take, but I want to show you the skeleton key. So you can see this contestant elements, content, and so on and so forth. But you can also just test the UI with with custom JavaScript. I just had a customer actually who wanted to test that their CSS was loading on the page correctly, and they weren't able to necessarily validate it by just looking at the screenshots. So what we did was just run a quick test to ensure that the CSS had actually loaded. And since it's a Boolean, it just passes through as a true or false. And that test step was something that they were able to pass in on this browser test that they were running. So that's a few different things that we can show off there. Now, let me go back to this page because I'd like to show you how all this ties in. So what we were looking at before was a failed test result, which stated that the step that I took here failed. Something went wrong, please try again. We knew that. But this was the step where it failed, where the checkout actually occurred. We applied this coupon code and it failed. So I'm going to look here at what actually occurred. So we were looking at the errors before where this said, this was a post 500 error. It says that this exception was caught. This winter 100 was the one that we were looking at. This is going to show me the load time for some of the resources that were loaded on the page at the time. But we are tying this synthetic test in with Datadog's APM. And so that actually allows me to look at the trace, the backend call that was made by the synthetics test. So this helps me rule out immediately if this was a front end or a back end problem. And you can see that there are a lot of errors coming from my trace. So this trace is telling me that the error is definitely not from the front end. It's definitely not network. It's not happening on the customer side. It is happening on the back end side with my architecture. And I can now take this, for example, and this is a unique URL. I can take this URL and send it to another member of my team. I used to say, in the pre-COVID world that, you can send this to your team in another state or another country. Right now, I can just send this to my coworker across town because they're not necessarily able to just come over and look over my shoulder when I find something. So we want to make it as easy as possible for that. This also functions as a monitor. So this is looking for successful actions. When it doesn't get a successful action, you can use a monitor to trigger an alert, and that alert can notify your team or you or anyone else that uses Datadog in a number of different ways. But the biggest ones, just off the top of my head, you could notify a Slack channel. You could notify, again, just a user via their email. You could notify PagerDuty or ServiceNow or any number of incident management tools. So there's a lot of different ways that you can trigger a notification. You could open up a trouble ticket in Jira, for example, so the support team would get something right away and they could catch this before they even have to get and dig into a real user session. But those are all different ways that you could notify your team when a synthetics test fails. So the reason I'm here, though, is because you'll notice that this also, within this trace, you can see that there's this browser request. And this browser request is happening on the front end, and then there's this rack request, which I'm not sure if anyone on the call is familiar with Ruby, but a rack request is Ruby on Rails. So this is showing me the delineation between the front end request and the back end request that's being made here. So the back end request is what's kicking off all of the different calls to services so that we can render this checkout process. And this is also showing me a stack trace of what actually occurred over here. But from the front end perspective, you'll see that right over here, this says, this has the RUM event hierarchy. And I want to point this out. I can actually jump from the synthetics test to real user monitoring from this screen, because again, everything is integrated. And I actually just want to point out really quick, I got a note from Yulia. It says, are there best practice recommendations on what needs to be monitored and have alerts set up? From an application performance management perspective, yes, we do provide some best practice recommendations there. We also have some machine learning with Watchdog, which will monitor your applications and notify you based on those alerts. When it comes to synthetics, though, usually those are tests that you would be setting up on your own for testing processes that you are looking for. We do have a lot of documentation on some, on setting these up. And we even have a training on learn.datadoghq.com if you want to go through that. But in general, when you're working with this, for best practices, I usually say that it's to look at key business flows. I think that's the most important thing. So logins, portals, checkout processes, anything that's important to, like, again, as I mentioned before, like marketing teams or advertising. Those are the things that usually you're testing for from a synthetics perspective. From RUM, that one's actually even easier, and I'll go over to real user monitoring and show you what that looks like. But if I jump over to real user monitoring, so I'm just going to jump over here, and this is actually going to look at my synthetic session in real user monitoring. This is not something on a practical level I would recommend, because you're basically paying to monitor your synthetics traffic. You can actually filter out synthetics traffic in real user monitoring if you wanted to do that. But I'm over here just to show you the connection between our different products so that you could see those together. Now, from actually setting up an alert, this one's even simpler. If I wanted to just look at all of the errors that are coming out of my application here, this is showing me all of those errors. And here it is in an analytics view. I can actually create a monitor on this, and that monitor can tell me if it's reached a certain threshold, and that threshold will notify me. So honestly, with sessions, it's about looking for errors more than anything, or you may want to look for traffic. But that really, in terms of best practice and real user monitoring, it's a lot simpler, I think. So the question, I got one other question from Sergey here. The question is, do you provide a feature of active monitoring, meaning that when a problem is identified, the monitor can correct the problem itself? We do have connections to various platforms that can be kicked off via API. And we also have a webhook functionality, and that webhook functionality can provide a lot of that auto remediation is what you're referring to there. So you could kick off a change in event bridge in AWS, for example, or you could you could use a webhook to kick off a script to roll back a deployment in Jenkins, for example. So there are ways that you can set that up if that's something that you're interested in. Personally, on my own process, I like to investigate before we kick something off, because I want to make sure that we're taking the proper actions. But I also understand that there are sometimes things that just pop up and they need to be fixed, and it's just about flicking a switch to get it fixed again. So you absolutely can do that using our webhook functionality and other functionalities through some of our integrations. It's a good question, though. Thank you. So if you recall, a few minutes ago, we were on the Shopist website purchasing something, and I'm actually going to go back and find my session, because I was on the site for a few minutes, and I want to see what exactly I did. So this looks like we went to chairs and bedding and then went to cart. So I think this is me. Looks like I'm here in the US. We can look at the attributes. This says that I'm in New York, not actually in Staten Island, but I know this is still me. So I can see that this is my session. This is one way I can identify myself, is in this case, I'm just looking for attributes I know to exist. You also can pass in custom attributes. And as I mentioned at the top of the call, my name is Clint Osterholtz, not Kellner. That is some information that we're passing in here as a context user email. Kellner is the kind person who helps run our demo site. So big thanks to him for making all of this possible. But this is a way that you can identify your customers as well, though, if that's something you want. Something that you can actually strip of any ID or anything like that, though, is you could just use a user ID like this that you pass in. We'll attribute that to the session because we're already capturing the session ID. And that means that when you're looking at all of the steps taken, in this case, we're looking at the page load. I went to chairs, I went to a product page, I went to a bedding page, I went to the cart, and then I tried to check out before failing. That's something that I can tie this ID to. So if you're using this for a support perspective, your support team can look at this, can look this ID up and say, okay, this is occurring for this customer right now. And I've taken a look at their path. We seem to know we've had a problem with this coupon code. So that's something that we can look at as well. So we can see right here that this is showing me the coupon code that was applied. We're actually collecting that as a custom attribute as well. So I can also search by that coupon code to see if we have a greater number of errors when people use that coupon code versus others. This is another one of those instances where I think it's important that you can jump in and out looking at things on an aggregate level versus looking at things on an individual level. So in instances like this, where I'm looking at a browse session and I go, well, I'm not sure if this is just happening to people whose internet's coming out of Staten Island. This helps me draw those conclusions by using the analytics view I showed you before. And again, just to drive that home, I can say, well, let's look at this by anyone who's using this cart path, anyone who's looking at this coupon code. And you can see I'm just clicking on these filters. But when we go back here up to the top, you can see that I've narrowed it down. Anyone using the cart path, anyone using this coupon code. And then when we go over to analytics, we can see what's actually occurring here for those customers. You can see that these are all the customers that have gone on the cart and used the winter coupon code. So that at least helps me see those. In general, when we're looking at this, overall, if you're ever trying to figure out exactly what occurred, and you can see you can sort this in different ways. So in this instance, I can look at different resources that have loaded. I can look again just by errors. So in this instance, we can see we have a lot of these cart errors that have occurred. And that was what we were seeing before. So if I look at this overall session, you can see where the session is loading. And this is another instance where customers tried to apply a coupon code. So you can see this is also using just the load action where they clicked on apply on the page cart. This went to this coupon to validate. And now I can see the backend trace here. The coupon looks like it applied successfully. There was a small error here, but it looks like this still completed successfully. The error did not appear to be stopping anything because it looks like this resolved to a 200 HTTP status. But this instance at least shows me that we were able to apply this coupon code successfully. So you have a number of different ways to look at this, but overall, you can also tie this into our APM side if there is something that helps you view, again, front end to back end. So if we go to my session again, or a session that was similar to it overall, I think I'll look for anything that said, I can go back in here and just look at these different attributes. This will help me sort by what it is that I'm looking for. Yes, so we had this one email address. So we can actually go back in and look for that to find my session again. So let's do Kellner. And these are just all the ones that have that user email. So here we go. That's my session again. So you can see, first of all, we're collecting a couple of custom actions that were on the page that are outside of the clicks that were happening. So this is just us trying to check every time someone's applied a coupon. But if we actually look at the checkout view, this shows us the trace. You can also see we have the logs up here, but this trace actually indicates that this error again occurred on the back end. And you'll notice that that looks fairly similar to the one that we saw over here, where the error was occurring with this shopping cart controller checkout action. So both of these have that shopping cart controller checkout action and have now produced this error. And I can actually see, if I look at my errors tab here, that this shows me I had a payment service reported of 503 unavailable. And if I look through all of these different actions, I can see one of them says that your rate limit has been exceeded for your IP address. So you need to email to have your rate limit increased. And that's really interesting to see, because that means that the problem that occurred here is one that I was talking about before. It's not network, it's not infrastructure, it's not my code. This is occurring with a third-party vendor. And it's a third-party API call that is not resolving appropriately and was not apparently handled, where the error handling was not set up properly. So the fact is that now someone is going out to try to check out and they're unable to do so. And rather than being told that's our problem, they're just being told to try again. So all of that combined together helps me investigate this. So again, I can send this specific view to some other member of my team. Or again, as I was saying before, if we just want to look at this for what's occurring on this page, I can say, well, let's look for this view path again, where everyone is on the cart page. And when we look over here in analytics, we can see that we're getting a lot of errors on that specific page. And I could even break out a table here to say, here's where that's happening by table. Or I can look at a geomap distribution and say, here are all the countries where we're seeing those errors. And the darker the color is, the more that error is occurring. So these are other ways that I can also display that information. Now, one thing that is related to this is error tracking. And what the error tracking will allow us to do is look at all of the errors that are occurring within the front end here. So in this case, you can see that this is looking both at in Android and in JavaScript. You can see also other different ways. These are other languages that are being supported here. But this actually will indicate to me what type of problems we're seeing. So in this case, we have one that just says invalid email. Someone's trying to do a sign up. And this shows me the type of error we're seeing, how often that error is occurring. And it shows me exactly on the line where this is occurring. And for some people who work with this, especially working with front-end technologies, you know that JavaScript gets minified a lot, or you're working in TypeScript instead and you have to compile to JavaScript. It means that the error messages and stack traces you get typically are useless because you don't know what exactly occurred in your real code. But you can actually upload a map so that we can see the error code. You can actually see the line of code where the problem is coming from. So this is actually also very useful. And you can see, again, this allows us to see different sessions, different version types, and also you can see the error and run. Got a question, can this be integrated in the Kubernetes platform and AWS platform? Yes, so I'm actually about to go over that for you right now. So I'm gonna pull back out of this demo and we're going to switch over back to the to the presentation view, and I'll show you how this is set up. So thanks for asking that question, Mel. That's you got to know how we got to do this. So let me show you where we get started. Now, you can get started very quickly with this. In fact, in the Datadog platform, if you're a current user, you can simply go straight to the UX monitoring portion of Datadog, which is on the left-hand side in your bar. It's all the way towards the bottom of the initial list, and you'll see synthetics and real user monitoring. And for synthetics, you can see you set those tests up like you set up monitors already. So you just have to have a URL endpoint that you're monitoring, and you can do SSL, HTTP, FTP. There's a lot of different ways that you can do API testing. Or with browser tests, you can just start with the URL that you're looking to monitor your key business flow from and go from there. When it comes to real user monitoring, we're using a JavaScript library for JavaScript, or we're using an SDK for iOS or Android. So either way, what you can set up, and actually, rather than show you this slide, probably makes more sense just to show you, I think. So let me just do that really quickly. So I'm going to just do this out of my setup account here, because that'll probably be easier to show you. I just clicked on the wrong thing. So let me see here. In this account, the way that I would set this up, so this is the icon I'm talking about. With synthetics test, I showed you kind of how to set those up. But with the real user monitoring applications, to set this up, I would just do new application, and then I would choose what I'm looking to monitor. So with JavaScript, obviously, you're looking at something from a browser perspective. These are for mobile, and also, of course, we have a beta now on React Native. So I choose one of these, and we'll just do test application because I'm doing that. So we will actually generate the SDK that you'll need to include. And this is the code that you need to actually copy paste in. So this gives you all the steps that you need to take here. And once you've gotten to this point, so that's for Android, of course, I'll do that again for simple browser testing here. And so yes, this can absolutely be used in Kubernetes and AWS, so long as you're putting it on site, basically. So you can see, in this case, I just have a script that I can put in the head tag right here, or I could use Node Package Manager to initialize it within my package. And this creates an application ID and a token. And this actually can start collecting that information immediately. You can even change the sample rate if you don't want to collect all of your sessions, you want to collect a portion of them. And you can choose to track interactions or not. So you can also turn that off. So as I said, you have a lot of granular control over what it is that you're looking to do there. So yeah, I would actually argue where this says get started in 30 minutes. It probably takes less time than that. Almost 29 minutes of that is waiting for your deploy changes to go through. The actual Datadog setup side of it is very quick, and you'd be able to get things up and running almost immediately. So I wanted to leave a few minutes towards the end of this presentation. We're at, it's about 10 minutes to the end of the hour, but I wanted to leave a little bit of time for any additional Q&A. I know I've been answering questions as we've been going along, but sometimes people like to wait to the end and they have some of their other more questions. So please feel free to use the Q&A box to start asking your questions. And I can start to answer them here. But yes, thank you all currently for going through all that with me. And yeah, please let me know what questions you have.
Clint, I think we have one question in the chat that came in.
Oh, we do? Okay. Oh, yes, I did get that one already.
Awesome.
Do synthetics tests have options to handle A/B testing? That's a good question. I would say that you'd probably want to do two different tests. I'll be honest with you on that one for A/B testing. The way that it works currently, at least, there's no option for Boolean logic, so that if one thing occurs, then another thing occurs versus another path. So typically for those A/B testing, it makes more sense just to set up a synthetics test to make sure that each of those paths exists. That said, if it's the type of A/B testing where you're changing color or verbiage or something like that, so long as the underlying HTML remains the same, so like you have a button with button functionality, or you have a div with div functionality, and you've given that a unique class name, that should not at least impact the capability of that test. So the test would still be able to function both ways. But really, A/B testing usually is best done with real user monitoring. With real user monitoring, you can actually set, if you want, you can set a variable that can pass in and attach to the session for the customer, So when the customer comes to the site and they've decided to go with option A, you can pass in option A and see the marketing that's happening there versus option B. So you could do it that way, but that's really more of a real user monitoring function. So to answer your question, Regis, kind of possible with synthetics, but I think rum is probably more what you're looking to go for. So thank you for the question. That was all my questions. Oh, here we go. I have a question here from Daniel. With rum, does the replay function actually run a synthetic test, or is it a recording of actual user activity? That's a great question. So to answer that, Daniel, the replay function recreates what the customer has seen. So what we're doing is showing you with all of the assets given, all of the cursor positions, everything that the customer has gone through. I didn't go over the replay function currently because we're in beta on that one, but that for that functionality, it will recreate what the customer has seen. It does not actually record what the customer is doing. So there's actually no synthetic test involved or anything like that, but we do recreate what the customer has seen. Sergey asked, what general limitations do you have to monitor clients concurrently? So I'm not sure if I fully understand your question, so please feel free to add on top of the question. But when you're talking about monitor clients concurrently, are you talking about how many agents you can put on servers? Are you talking about how many users on the site are we able to monitor? Just make sure I want to understand you there so I get the correct. Talking about scalability. So thank you. Yeah, so we're built on AWS and we've moved also to our infrastructure being on GCP and on Azure. So we have functionality on all cloud environments, and we've always been on cloud. So when we talk about scalability, we can handle anything essentially. We scale out as much as the servers that we have installed everything on. So in terms of like the amount of data that we're seeing frequently, like just logs volume, for example, which is huge. Like we've been able to handle logs from some of the largest like streaming customers, for example, who provide a lot of those logs, from media companies, from banks, and from financial institutions. So in terms of scalability, it's essentially as much as you need. So thank you for that question though. We got about, oh, here we go. I mean, you had a question. So in a React project, where's the best place to paste the Datadog init code? So I won't be able to speak to that on this call right now, but I can take that off the side. So we can, you can mention that, because I know that currently we're in beta on it. So I'll be honest with you, I haven't gotten a chance to work with it as much as I'd like. But we can definitely answer that for you. If it's not in our documentation, then please feel free to reach out to our support team, and they'll be able to help you with getting started on the init code there. So thanks, Amin. And I noticed, let me see here, that there was a hand raised, and I forget how to look for hand raised, but if you were raising your hand for a question, you can just put the question in the Q&A box. It should be at the bottom of your screen. Okay, so I believe that's everything. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to join me today. And I did want to say, if again, if you would like to use Datadog for a trial, please go to datadoghq.com. You can start a free trial there. If you're an existing customer, you can always try any new products within your platform. And thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out. We will, of course, be sending you follow-up. And if you need anything, any support from a technical perspective, there's always our support team. So thank you all so much and have a great day.